demigod status. According to the New York Times, he emerged as an authoritative voice in the crisis. ABC News said that this was the moment Andrew Cuomo has prepared for all his life. And there was more.
You see a spectacular political leader emerging from this in Andrew Cuomo.
He's governing based on facts, data, and science, and he's just telling it like it is.
Even lifelong Republicans tell me, they look at Cuomo and they're like, God, there's a leader.
Governor, it is good to remind people that they are just coming to love you now as much as I have my whole life.
I love that one. Well, what are the actual facts? Well, let me just say, and I said this before on the show, I actually do admire the governor's really blunt and no-nonsense approach to fighting for the people of his state. That's what governors are supposed to do. And I also got to say I appreciate his willingness to put politics aside. He came, he met with the president. I think he's trying to work with them for the good of his own state. But when it comes to the actual management, the nitty-gritty management of the crisis, is he really succeeding? Well, let's take a look. Now, Trump was pilloried for questioning whether New York really needed 30 to 40,000 ventilators. Well, Cuomo, as you remember, was adamant that his state needed them. But according to the latest estimates from the IHME model, the state's ventilator needs peaked 2 weeks ago at not 30 or 40,000, but 5,986. What about the hospital beds? Well, Cuomo said the state would need 140,000 hospital beds. Well, the IHME model now saying that number peaked at 19,836 hospital beds, only 7 times less than what Cuomo said. Well, it was a bad model, I guess. But remember, the feds, they rushed thousands of ventilators to the state after production was ramped up, and then the USNS Comfort was sent to New York City to provide beds, barely used. The Army Corps of Engineers moved heaven and earth to turn the Javits Center into a field hospital. Remember, Trump was relentlessly hit over the head and said, like, you got to do this, you got to do this. Could those resources, though, in retrospect, have been more useful elsewhere? Well, who knows? But it's worth examining. It's worth thinking about this. And that leads us to what is perhaps Cuomo's most tragic failure. A New York directive that requires nursing homes to readmit elderly residents who've tested positive for the coronavirus. Well, that result has been devastating, with over 3,500 nursing home fatalities. When the media finally got around to asking about this ridiculous policy, Governor Cuomo was largely in the dark.
If you are tested positive for the virus, are you allowed to be admitted to a nursing home is the question, or readmitted?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, and it's refreshing that he didn't try to, just spin it, but he didn't know. And that is the vulnerable population here. Just ask Sweden what they've had to deal with. It's unacceptable. And why aren't other media outlets holding him accountable, either for the early numbers and the projections were off by a factor of 6? I mean, we raised this issue with Dr. Fauci, by the way, early in the game. I think it was in mid-March, and I said, what if these numbers are wrong to Fauci? And Fauci was, well, that would be a problem. Well, compare what you've heard about Cuomo to someone like Florida's Ron DeSantis. Well, the Miami Herald told him to act like he gives a damn. Well, Florida's death per 100,000 today is 4. New York's 81 per 100,000. The Washington Post called Kristi Noem's South Dakota a hotspot. Well, South Dakota's death rate per 100,000, 1. So maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop acting like partisan sounding boards and start trying to do a little bit more of an even-handed look at some of their favorite state leaders. Again, I think he's been aggressive for the people of his state. That's what a governor should do, but it doesn't mean you're a demigod and never get questioned. And by the way, that should include his appearances with, well, his little brother on CNN. Joining me now is Rudy Giuliani, former New York City mayor. Rudy, I go back to my original question. Governor Cuomo has had a pretty good ride from the beginning of all of this and dealing with a very difficult situation, obviously, in New York. But does he deserve some degree of this praise?
I'm willing to give it to him. And I do get upset about the double standard because I think a lot of other governors have done just as good a job. Governor Cuomo was handed the biggest problem. More people died in New York than any place else. What is it, 40%? He did exactly what I would do if I were the governor. He asked for too much. The president, I think, deserves a lot more credit than he gets because the president actually handled it wisely. He gave him what he needed. He questioned it, but he gave him what he needed. No one can say that the president didn't give New York everything that it needed to deal with it. Even Governor Cuomo has to say that. And I mean, the reality is, all of them were guessing. This is a novel virus, right? New. We didn't know what we were dealing with. So someone would make a very wild and crazy projection. You'd have to feel like you had to buy it. So I think the governor has done a good job given the political environment. He's made some mistakes. So did I when I dealt with September 11. But by and large, he's done a good job for his state. He fought for us. He got us what we needed. I give the president even more credit because the president was the one who had to.
All right, we're going to move it forward. Let's move it forward.
Give him what he wanted.
Yeah, we got it. Let's move the conversation forward, Rudy, because here's the deal. A lot of this right now is political. A lot of the conversation, you don't want it to be political,
Sure it is.
but any bit of good news in the way this virus is handled by a red state governor, any bit of good news is immediately discounted. Whether it's a therapy that's worked in some people, whether it's a UV light might kill the virus, whether sunshine. I mean, it's all turned around and said, well, Trump, you don't know this. You just want people to go out in the playground and die tomorrow. I mean, that's where this has gone. And all I'm saying about Cuomo is, look, yeah, he got more than he needed. We have empty ships and empty field hospitals for the most part. A few people, but not what they thought. Okay, but then don't trash Ron DeSantis, don't hit Kristi Noem, and don't go after Mitch McConnell when he says Kentuckians don't want to pay for endless handouts when we could reopen the country.
Yeah, and don't try to blame Donald Trump for the coronavirus. Blame China, because that's where the blame belongs. And stop defending China, which is outrageous. I mean, stop lying about what happened in China. I mean, this thing goes back to November at least. China hid it for at least a month and a half. China lied about it. China protected their own people by not letting them leave Wuhan.
Yeah.
And they sent 1.5 million people out of Wuhan to come and infect us.
Well, that's all right, Rudy.
I mean, it's outrageous what China did.
Michael Bloomberg is going to handle the tracing army of tracers in New York. We learned today
That's
from Cuomo.
totally ridiculous.
Yeah, an army of tracers.
Then we should trace everybody for cancer.
Yeah, army of tracers.
We should trace everybody for cancer and heart disease and obesity and I mean a lot of things kill you more than COVID-19. So we should be traced for all those things.
Well, there are a lot of
life
people
possesses a certain degree of risk.
Yeah,
And we have to be willing to live with it.
New York
the
has
thing
to
that I
come
fault
back.
the Democratic governors for, well, the thing I fault the Democratic governors for is trying to keep us closed in and not trying to open us. Take some steps toward opening up businesses. Try a few experiments. Let's get back to work again because we're ready to go back to work again. And we can't be protected forever from everything.
Can't live in a bubble. That doesn't work. Rudy, thank you so much. Great seeing you tonight, as always. And coming up, we warned you this would happen. Democrats are openly exploiting the COVID crisis to achieve pipe dreams, political pipe dreams. Steve Forbes, Mike Huckabee, tell us how next.